everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Harry Potter Trading Card Game Revival podcast. We're going to be talking about everything related to the game, including set reviews, card discussion, tournament and ban list discussion, insights from the design team, and everything else you can imagine. My name is Sammy, and I am the leader of the Revival team. I orchestrate a lot of the designing of the sets, I run tournaments, and I kind of do a lot of that stuff. I've been playing the Harry Potter trading card game since I was a child when it first came out, and I've been part of the Revival team since about 2019 when we started designing sets and releasing new cards.
Hi everyone, I'm Reese. I have been playing the Harry Potter card game also since it first came out, joining the Revival team in the R&D 2 team about a year ago now, and joining the group in general at the beginning of COVID back in 2020.
Hi, I'm Wamin. I've been playing HPTCG since like 2 weeks before I joined the Revival team, but that was around 5 or 6 years ago. I've been with the team since HOS and been sticking with it ever since until now.
Yeah, it's weird that it's been 5 years and we are about to release our seventh set in the spring, and we have had so many sets and tournaments and just other things happening. I'm hopeful that we can continue this until we complete all of the Harry Potter books. Yeah. So we have a tournament coming up, and we have tournaments about every 3 to 4 months. These are Revival format tournaments, which means that we have a ban list, a sideboard, a mulligan rule. We include the Revival sets as well as the original 5 sets. And these tournaments are ran online usually because we have people playing worldwide. Tournaments last approximately 2 weeks, and you have about 3 days to compete with whoever you're paired up with for that round. There tend to be between 3 to 5 rounds per tournament, depending on the number of entrants. And usually the winner gets to design a card with the Revival team. This has led in the past to cards such as Pensieve, as well as some of the members who have won becoming permanent members of the design team. So what we want to talk about for this first episode is, given that we've had a ban list update that was rather substantial, as well as a new set that came out that was also substantial, we want to talk about what do we expect for this tournament? What do we think is going to be the top deck? What do we think is not going to really be a viable deck anymore? What are some cards that we're expecting to see from Goblet of Fire? And what are our personal expectations, even if these things don't necessarily come true?
I don't think any competitive play at all in HPTCG Revival.
Yeah, no
In
major
addition
things, right?
to
No major tournaments or anything like that since the ban list.
yeah,
So, yeah.
and in addition, Goblet of Fire is still pretty new. I don't think anybody knows what the actual meta is going to look like at all for this tournament.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We had a major update in June with the ban list that really hit a Lesson Destruction control archetype and really hit adventures. So with these being banned, I think the new question is, like, what is the meta now? Because the meta previously really was this heavy control gameplay style, and we really tried to kind of shift that with the ban list update. So with these cards being banned, what is the meta? Does it continue to shift into some other form of control? Does it abandon control? Does control become a smaller part? Does lesson destruction become a smaller part? What happens?
I think you probably try and have that sort of thing come through or test it regardless of the bans that have happened that really focus on those lesson destruction um, deck types, right? So I think you'll see people trying to utilize that still, whether or not it becomes the main strategy. I don't know if we'll see it so much, but I think the Goblet of Fire has such a huge array of cards that there's a lot of things we'll see people trying out, even in a competitive setting.
Yeah, I think that Control really got a lot of new tools, even though they lost stuff like Invisible Ink and Scribble Fours. You have things like Perfume Fire that hits 3 cards now. Though granted, it does hit your cards, but you can also build your deck so that you're recycling characters or things that you've played before that you don't actually mind bouncing. But to me, it honestly feels that the loss of Invisible Ink and Scribble Fours is kind of like the death knell for Lesson Destruction. It's a little bit too much of a tempo loss to be playing 1-for-1 Lesson Destruction to try to keep someone down. So I'm not exactly sure how much we're going to be seeing after the ban list.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. Invisible Ink in Scribble Force got kind of replaced in the form of Depulso, Stairs into Slides, and Resentful Goodbye, which does give some tools back to control in a more balanced way. But given that these are lower cost and not as powerful as the predecessors, what does happen to control? Does it shift? Does it stay? Does it go away? What's going to happen?
I would say probably definitely expect them to be played across the board. I think Hogwarts of History gave us some great tools, not just those cards as the removal, but in general. But those ones, I think, lower cost. They're not the 8 or 9 cost cards for a heavy control type, and they give you selection, which is really, I think, what you want with a general removal card. So I think Charms Transfiguration, although you may see it move from the focus on lesson destruction and that sort of control sphere, I think they're still very viable because they still got that hand up from these removal pieces. So
I would actually be very excited to see some sort of like Charms Transfiguration starting Madame Maxime as your only source of damage, because she kind of is like your win condition by herself if you want to build a deck that's literally just pure removal, like 40 cards of removal, 20 lessons, and then Maxime. You will chip your opponent down in time.
That sounds like an absolutely awful deck to play against. I hate control, and I would absolutely hate to do that. Um,
Well, it's now a new option.
it is, and I had somebody message me and say that they think they broke Maxime. And I'm curious to see how that translates into a tournament deck, if it translates into a tournament deck or not. So that'll be interesting. I do think it'd be cool to
Definitely.
see a Charms Transfiguration deck kind of make some waves in some way. Um, but yeah, I am curious as well. So Abraxan is a powerful new creature that came out in Goblet of Fire.
Jeez.
Very, very strong. And I've been seeing a couple of people play with Abraxan and Moonlit Transformation, which is a slightly older card from Echoes of the Past, I
Yeah, I
think.
think it's Echoes. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
And
all blurring together.
they do kind of blur a bit. But using the Moonlit Transformation to get out Abraxan at 8 power rather than the 12 that Abraxan is. And then, I don't know, play Moonlit into Steel Claw and do like 25 damage in a turn.
Definitely. I think high cost creatures were really missing something because most of them require Care of Magical Creatures lessons to be discarded from play, which means that you do need to run Care of Magical Creatures. But Abraxan actually doesn't have that requirement. So when you play Moonlit Transformation, you can take or put in your Abraxan from your hand without a single Care of Magical Creatures lesson, and that's just your finishing endgame.
still takes it away from the bigger end creatures, which I think in the design team we're all aware of, that mid-rangey large creatures archetype doesn't exist. But yeah, it gives that creature-based combo deck something to finish with. In the tournament, really looking forward to, I think, the combination of Goblet of Fire coming out with a range of cards that are very, very viable as deck archetypes, and the ban list removing the clear, obvious good deck from what we think is at least the existing meta. It puts us in a very exciting space. We got Abraxan, we have Madame Maxine, even Hermione as well,
Wow.
with the new Hermione opening up a bunch of non-witches or wizards as starters. There's a lot to look forward to. Witch sharpening potion. There's so many.
Yeah, so given the new Hermione that lets you play a starting character who usually can't be your starting character, have you guys seen anything really come out with her that is viable? Or do you think that she's just kind of this meme character that isn't going to really start a powerful deck?
So there's the obvious like Circadian route that a lot of people I think have been trying out recently, which to be fair, his effect is extremely strong, especially if you don't need to pay the 2 action tax to get him into play. But I've been trying something with like nearly headless Nick as my starter,
Oh,
and I don't
what?
think it's working out that well.
So then what is Nick actually doing as a starter?
Uh, Mostly pulling books for better ramp. I think it's not as good as Draco Malfoy Slytherin, but it does give you extreme consistency in trying to hit like 5 or 7 power in a pretty decent number of turns, because you can always just you pull the books that you need depending on what's your lesson count in your hand. And if you
So
don't actually need those books, like you can pull other things. Like the deck is a Goblet of Fire deck, so like you can pull Goblet of Fire if you need it, or if you're set with your ramp.
so do you use him to pull the year 2 books, or do you use him to pull the brand new year 4 books?
No, if you have like 4 lessons in your hand, 3 to 4 lessons in your hand, you probably want to pull Standard Book of Spells Grade 4.
Okay.
Or the other books, the 5 power give 2 lessons, which gives you a very like consistent ramp to like 6, 8-ish.
Another great addition in Goblet of Fire as well, those new ramp pieces. Again, it's not necessarily like a build around me archetype, but it just lets people move in that more ramp direction that we haven't really seen. It's great.
Definitely opens up a lot more options, I think.
I think Cadogan was the pretty obvious one for most people, but you've got a bunch of things to try out, right? You can start with Hagrid, the original Hagrid now, and see can you get creatures to do a bit more something, or even the Fat Lady can lean towards a very character control heavy because Gryffindor has a lot of good characters in it. I think there's quite a few options for Hermione to explore now.
So the question I have with Hermione is that the character that she pulls from the deck can be discarded from play. So do you use Nick's ability earlier, anticipating that he'll be discarded, or do you just kind of hold on to it and you don't really worry about what's going to happen?
Yeah, if you're running something like Nearly Headless Nick and trying to do the ramp that I'm talking about, you probably want to pop him earliest or latest like second turn after you see things. Like once your opponent hits 4 power, you really want to have already popped him in case like your opponent has picking on Neville for him.
Okay, so we talked about Maxine and Hermione. Are there any other characters from Goblet of Fire that we're kind of expecting to see either as a starting character or potentially as a character in deck?
I think the obvious answer there is probably Bill, a generic searching piece. Now, definitely could see, I think, play in the main deck, unless there's a super focused searching piece in a combo deck or something like that. He might be the starter. I think other option, most likely was it Fleur or was it Rita? I think we're seeing a bit of testing.
I've seen a couple people starting to try like Fleur decks, and I don't know. Back when I was playtesting GOF, I was like, she's terrible. And I'm okay with that. But I've been wrong about cards before, so
You mean something like Swallowed Snitch?
right.
Um,
Oh my gosh, everyone keeps bringing this up.
You will forever be picked on about this. I was actually playing a really interesting game yesterday, and it was spiders versus plants. And somebody used Fleur actually to play Whomping Willow from the discard pile, which was cool with 5 lessons in play. Didn't really do much because I had no items in play, but they were using Pumpkin Patch to have Willow absorb a bunch of damage. Unfortunately, I had Moody's spiders or demonstration spiders out there. That kind of deterred that plan because they do so much damage. But it was a cool way to use Fleur, so we'll kind of see what happens with her in the tournament.
I think Goblet of Fire is just so many options, and really, really viable cards and decks now that's come through. Like, it's really stepped up from previous designs, at least, I think.
As far as opening up, I think the top end of the meta, I'm pretty sure GOF is probably the biggest, or going to be the biggest impact out of all the sets.
Oh, I agree. Just given casual games and the conversations I've been having, more people seem to be more excited about more cards from this set than any other, which is exciting for us as designers to see that people are super excited and that this is going to be a highly played set. And I want to talk about some decks from last tournament as well. So, Huamin, your character deck actually, I believe, took the top spot. And then number 2 and 3 were both Lesson Destruction decks of various degrees. So I'm curious, where do you see your character deck in this tournament, given the pieces that were lost with the banned and restricted list on June 1st and the new cards from Goblet of Fire?
Yeah, I think that characters are still extremely viable. My previous list that I was running in the last tournament, I believe the only thing that got hit was the 4 times Hagrid needs help, which slows the deck down just a little bit, but you can also transition to a more control-y type of play style, even though you only have like a couple lessons in play, by leaning more into things like Remus Lupin, and then you can get your damage out by using more early grip hooks and recycling them faster.
So what is your replacement for Hager Needs Help? Is that Lupin, or are you going to replace that with something else?
I mean, I was already running to Lupin's main board. I'm not exactly sure what the replacement for Haggard Needs Help would be, considering that I probably don't want to play characters again. Don't hold me to it, but I'm like 90% sure that I'm not playing characters again. I assume
Well,
you're.
I might take up the mantle then and
Oh yeah, go for
watch
it.
watch your games from the previous tournament. A Bill seems like a great substitute here, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the Hagrid needs help. Was that a winning piece trying to do the damage, or was it just a slow your opponent down piece mainly?
It's like a tempo play, and it also gets them closer because there isn't actually all that much damage that you can find in characters. Most of it is just grip hook, which means that Haggard Needs Help is like a very large portion of like the damage that I was doing in every match.
Right. So playing it early on sort of meant your opponent had to answer it, or the action advantage you'd get would be overwhelming. And
Yeah.
because they have to answer it, it sort of gave you that reach that you felt the deck was missing.
Yeah, but I think the deck probably pivots into going it to like 4 or 5 power for those nice like transfiguration removal cards, something like picking on Neville or Stairs into Slide from Hogwarts of History.
But it also probably need to pivot towards maybe a little bit of a stronger finisher than grip hook, right? If it doesn't have that reach that you kind of need.
I'm not exactly sure about that. Creepy plus grip hook is quite a lot of damage. As long as you can keep using grip hook, it probably just is like 1 or 2 more uses of grip hook than you needed before.
So it's not actually too bad.
Yeah, you say that, but that's also like you have to realize you have to play another magical mess remover and then another grip hook every time you want to do that. Possibly even like cannot happen to fetch them out of your discards. So that's like a 3 or 4 action investment to get the cards and then actually play them all.
So how much does your deck pivot into a Goblet of Fire deck? And now we're talking about the card,
Oh
not the set
God.
itself. But Goblet of Fire is what, like 11 or 12 cost or something. But
Yeah.
it's a pretty great finisher to fetch out like 6 characters from your deck and then start doing some stuff. So does your deck pivot into that, or is this character deck you have just separate and we might see a brand new character deck kind of come out?
Yeah, this deck is definitely not pivoting to 11 power cards when it previously topped out at 1. There's just no possible way. I think if you actually want to play a Goblet of Fire deck, it's going to lean more into that combo control-ish sphere of like trying to ramp very fast, running a little bit of disruption, and then just playing Goblet of Fire and trying to close out the game extremely quickly after playing Goblet of Fire. Whether that's getting out more actions with platform and trying to close out the game on the turn you play Goblet of Fire, or playing a little bit slower with something like pulling an Arthur out of your deck for 11 damage a turn.
Do you end up also running something like potions with that deck? So you can play what is it? Misbrewed Polyjuice? No, not Misbrewed. Mandrake Draft.
Yeah, the card's fine if it's hitting for 11, but also like
You say that as of 11 damage is not that much.
yeah, 11's not that much. I mean, you've already hit like 12-ish power. I just always have thought that Mandrake Drought is like kind of a superfluous card.
It feels win-more-y.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I would agree. I think for it to have a proper place in something competitive, you'd need a toolboxy mid-range character deck, which seems a bit of a stretch. Not like there won't potentially be one day, but you need to get to 6 power, and then you want to be able to have a few options to use it on, not have it so focused if it's, I say only doing 11 damage, but yeah, only doing 11 damage. When that can be answered in other turns. So it's not like a full combo piece or anything like that. It's sort of just at that stage splashed color for a large amount of damage, like a burn spell.
There's also just not really a lot of once per turn ability characters that exist. I think there's maybe like 6, and Arthur is really the only like good viable target for that card.
Wow. Think that if you are going to run it, I think it's possibly a combination of Arthur slash Rita and Remus Lupin would actually kind of enable the card to do something where if Remus Lupin is like your only source of removal, sometimes you do need to have two uses of Remus Lupin to answer both of the threats that your opponent put down on the turn. That's when the card has a little bit more modularity than just, oh, I'm going to win more and deal 22 damage in one turn instead of 11 damage in one turn.
So that's a really interesting way to use Manic Draft, and I would not have thought to use it in that kind of controlly way, but that definitely makes sense. And given what I've seen with your playstyle a bit with characters, that entirely makes sense that you would think of that kind of play pattern. And I know that we've talked about this quite a few times, but I just want to bring it up again. Given that control archetypes and Lesson Destruction lost 8 to 12 cards of their deck, do these decks maintain their top 2 and 3 status, or do these decks fall out of the first 1, 2, or 3 places of the tournament?
Well, my one, the Fred and George one's not 8 now either. It's 16 cards got banned, I believe. So
oh, that's a big hit.
Yeah. Well, my inspiration from the deck, for listeners that don't know, obviously we record some of the tournament matches and stuff like that. And behind the scenes, we do a lot of data crunching with copies of cards played over the tournament. We do a bit of review of the matches to see what gets played and when and what helped in what circumstances. And the Fred and George deck I submitted was a compounding of all that, just going, here, let's test these cards to see if they're band worthy was really what I was going for. And I think it worked.
Yeah, the results don't lie. You dropped what, 1 game to me, was it? In the tournament?
2 games to you, yeah. I lost to you in the tournament, yeah.
Yeah, 1 match.
You
2
two
games.
owed me as well, yeah. And I sideboarded for pretty much spot on other than characters. So the table troubles came in a lot of help. And the drawing is the swords for the
And gaze into the mirror. You know, you gotta stop my spell damage.
Yes, Gaze into the Mirror was for, I think the previous tournament had the large burn spell
Oh
deck.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Reptile
yeah.
House, you know, I'm playing
Reptile House. That
one
was
lesson.
yes, that was actually very useful. Obviously, that's actually one I only really sideboard in if I'm on the play. If you're on the draw, then it's sort of you've already let them drop 2 lessons in. But if you're on the play, it's actually really, really
Yeah.
good.
Dropping them down to 1 lesson is very strong, and the solve clause on that card is so punishing. Like, geez.
Especially with Fred and George, it's one action to then, oh, also sorry, I have a second one. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And that actually straight up won me one of the matches. That
Yeah,
card.
definitely. Very different when you're on the play versus when you're on the draw, or not on the draw, because on the draw doesn't exist in this game.
Yeah. So I want to pivot a little bit, and I want to talk about the last deck in the top 3, and that was another lesson control deck played by Finn, and that was essentially destroy lessons, and while you are playing tiny creatures to do like small chip damage. So that deck only lost Scribble 4s and Invisible Ink, whereas your deck lost 4 cards, which totaled 16 total in it. So does this deck still exist with the new ban list and with Goblet of Fire out? Or does this deck have to pivot and it's no longer really a deck?
Yeah, I think it does need to pivot somewhat. Like it heavily relied on setting up that board, that damage, or even the garden gnomes, and then sitting behind them as you attacked your opponent's lessons. So the scribble walls and visible ink, obviously, they come later anyway because they're higher cost, but it's definitely setting up the creatures. And then you remove your lessons, you remove your opponent's ability to do their thing and stop the thing that you're doing. So I definitely think it pivots to something else, probably in the smaller direction, maybe dropping the capybaras.
Yeah, if it's not getting up to 7 power, which is also capybara, for the other cards, then it's not really worth it to keep doing that.
Yeah, three is a good amount of damage as well, but I think it will probably look for a little bit lower end, maybe going back to just maybe traditional McGonagalls.
I think that if you're going to run something that's like transfiguration creatures, I think you're pivoting to a more tempo-ish mid-rangey playstyle than that higher end control, like set up a couple small creatures and then remove your opponent's ability to fight back.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if this kind of deck still has a place and still exists in this tournament.
I honestly think that like Transfiguration creature control-ish archetype is actually going to get supplanted by Abraxan plus Midnight Transformation.
Well, so is this a replacement deck, or is this just like another deck that starts to exist?
I just think that there's no reason to play small creatures anymore when you do have that option of going Moonlit Transformation now into
Hmm.
this very strong Abraxan play.
So then another question I have is this deck runs 27 Kero magical creature lessons and no transfiguration lessons and relies entirely on its starting character, Professor McGonagall, to provide that transfiguration lesson. So if this deck continues to exist, which it has for the past two tournaments, should people start running more starting character interaction? Or does that not matter? Does this deck need to start including transfiguration lessons? What's that look like?
We've just got one new piece now with Goblet of Fire, this in Disciplinary Transfiguration.
Uh huh.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I
I
think
think
that card
so.
is actually extremely playable, unlike most of the other cards that kind of shut down your opponent's starting character's ability to provide a lesson. So I do think that you do actually need to start running at least a little bit more, even if you have a lesson providing professor.
Is this like a direction that more decks should start taking? Because I don't really feel like, I mean, we've made, I think, three cards in total, maybe four that interact with the starting character. And none of them really see play at all. So is this a direction more people should
My
start going or no?
heart is broken by the fact that the tournament previous to this one, I was running four of a card called Destroyed Broom, which does shut down your opponent's lesson providing professor.
Yeah, but do we need to start in general playing more of these cards? Or does it not really matter? Do more lessons of various sorts need to be played in these decks, or can we rely on these professors?
Like I said, I think that Disciplinary Transfiguration is a little bit more, or it's more playable than the other ones that just shut down your opponent's starting character. So I think we might be seeing more of that in at least the sideboard, which would put pressure on people to put or have a more varied lesson base.
Definitely. I don't know if we'll see it in this very next tournament, the disciplinary transfiguration or starter interaction in general. I think people will get more of an idea after the tournament whether or not the majority of decks are now heavily relying on their starter or not. I think your point's great when you're talking about McGonagall as a starter and them not running any transfiguration lessons, sorry. But if they're using Angelina, sort of maybe thinking, oh, can I get there without her? Do I need to get it back? I really, yeah, I think it will depend on what the starters will be. Like if people are running a lot of Hermione, then it's sort of like too little, too late.
Yeah, that is a really, really good point. I want to pivot to a different starter who's been around since the original five sets were printed, Draco Malfoy Slytherin. He is the classic item starter, and he is not placed in any of the tournaments in like the top two or three. So I'm curious, given that Goblet of Fire had the most number of items of any set that has been released, are item decks now a thing? Is Draco Malfoy Slytherin finally going to place in the top, or are item decks still just not there?
I think we'll get there this time. Draco, I think, is not reflective of his placements in the tournament. I think maybe Draco is falling behind more because items aren't necessarily as strong as he is. And would definitely the lesson control was just too good, I think. And previously we've seen stuff where combo sort of gets you over the line a lot easier than relying on your opponent making decisions in between doing damage or something that Draco items has. So I definitely think with that gone, maybe he'll get over the line now. He's just very strong.
One of the problems, though, with a traditional like Draco item deck is there is this one GOF card that we have not talked about yet, which I think is going to cause very big shifts in, or cause very big splashes in the meta, and that card is Melted Cauldron, where if you're traditional Draco items deck and you played like four or five items out, and then your opponent plays Melted Cauldron and tosses five lessons at you, you might just die because you just took like 30 damage in a turn and lost all your items.
Do you think people will play Multiple Cauldron off the bat? They expect items
Um,
to be so prevalent? Because I mean, if you don't, it's most likely a 9 mana dead card or 9 mana remove one single 5 cost, fourth year book or something like that.
I could definitely see it in the sideboard of decks that are in potions and going up that high. Like if spoilers, I have no idea what I'm running for this tournament. But if I am running a deck that can run Melted Cauldron, then it's definitely getting shoved at least into a sideboard because I am somewhat scared of Draco item decks.
Well, and it
Well,
does damage still too. So it's not just removing stuff, it's still doing damage. So like as 9 cost, maybe discard 2 potions and maybe you do 10 damage. Like not the best since 1 card giving 11 damage is not good. 1 card discarding 2 potions and 2 items and 10 damage. Like, where's that line that makes Melted Cauldron worth playing? I don't know. That feels like it's decent, but I don't know.
I think the other question is it this or, I mean, if you have the option between the colors, is it this or Table Trouble, right? Because the big restriction here is not only the discarding of your lessons, but it's the 9 cost. Table Trouble at 5 is a lot more timely. You might have it drop when you've only got 6 or 7 lessons and you're like, I need to deal with these items because I am dead either this turn or the next if I don't. So Table
Oh,
Trouble is definitely like a bit more useful as far as timing goes.
Well, and there's also Living Room Explosion and Charms. So now you have these 3 options, and hopefully with Melted Cauldron and Living Room Explosion being cards, you're no longer forced into Table Trouble that much. And I think that Potions and Charms particularly both have a lot of ramp options just to get you high enough where hopefully that number doesn't really matter too much. But I do see what you're saying, that 5 is just a very pretty number to get to, and is much more appealing.
5 is a lot easier to hit than 8 or 9. I do believe that just the threat of being able to play Melted Cauldron is going to make a lot of Draco decks start playing differently.
Hopefully.
Yeah, and I mean as well, like a card I wanted to talk about was the new Wit Sharpening Potion. It's definitely a build around me. It's its own sort of archetype coming out of the Goblet of Fire, and I would be very, very keen to play a new sort of archetype, a new deck that wants to win in its own way. Do you think it runs the risk of severely underperforming if everyone's expecting Draco items to come into this next tournament?
Yeah, I think you're in for a kind of bad time if everyone's like their sideboard is Table Trouble, Living Room Explosion. Melted Cauldron actually, I don't think does too much to Witch Sharpening because they have a ton of items that just don't cost very much. So the return on investment for Melted Cauldron is not the best, but Table Trouble and Living Room Explosion can definitely ruin a Witch Sharpening Potion deck's day.
Well, and I'm also curious with Wit Sharpening. When we were test playing it, in very specific ways, and there were specific decks that we were working on and whatnot. And so I've seen people do some other different things with Wit Sharpening. So I'm just kind of curious, like, where does Wit Sharpening really go given how people are playing it? Does that deck even really exist? I would love to see somebody build that deck and make it because we put a lot of time into designing that card and that suite of cards. I'm just not really sure where it goes right now and what is the best deck to play as a Wit Sharpening deck.
Yeah, I honestly have no idea how to make like the best Witch Sharpening Potion deck. So I would be excited to see what people brew for that too.
Yeah, so the last thing that I want to talk about is the ban list because we banned 6 cards from it, which was quite a large ban. Five were banned, including Scribble Force, Invisible Ink, Wand Shop, Letters from No One, and Hager Needs Help, and then we restricted deboning to 1. So given all of this, like, what replaces these cards? Do decks just do something entirely different? Do these cards being banned now mean that Draco Malfoy Slytherin has a shot to win, despite all of these other cards that kind of counter Draco Malfoy? So, ban list thoughts. How is this really going to affect the tournament beyond what we've already said?
Yeah, I think one of the first things I'd say about it is obviously 6 banning cards, six banned cards is quite a lot. I think it's the most we've done in a single banning, I think.
Yeah, we had 4
I
one
wanna
time,
say,
but
yeah.
6 is the most at once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it is probably an important thing to say is, again, we do talk about it a lot in the background in the revival team, but we'd probably say this is very, very data driven based on performances. And then also the other half of it being we want the game to still be good to play. So I think one of the ones that probably caught a few people out was, why was deboning banned or restricted to one rather? It doesn't really see much of any play at all. But we know from the many years we've been playing the game now, it's not a great card to play against, and it can just be something that pushes you out of the game. So the other one probably being One Shop. It has put up numbers before, not necessarily the best of the best, but again, it was just powerful for the spot it had, despite not being supported well. So we're very aware of what direction we're heading, as well as the performance of other cards, which is what's lent into these six cards being chosen.
Yeah, like I do want to say a little bit more about One Shot because it definitely hasn't really seen a lot of like meta decks being built around it, but it also is just such a strange card to exist that we all always have to be cognizant when, as designers, we're designing something and thinking, oh, what's the theoretical fastest way that someone hits the amount of power required to play a card? And inevitably, a lot of times that is indeed One Shot, a single card in your deck that's easily fetchable with a lot of different search cards. And
in the same color too. So
yeah, and that causes like a very awkward place for it to be, that we thought it's a little bit better off not being in the game.
Yeah, I think it restricts the future design not only in the high cost cards but also in other ramp, because a lot of the time we'll look through something. A big one for me was when designing Hogwarts History. Ravenclaw Common Room was sort of felt very underwhelming, because if you're playing that, why not just play One Shot? And not that that's probably a direction we want to go, is sort of like, oh well, we don't want to restrict ourselves from playing or designing weaker cards in the future, but One Shot was just so over the top. I mean, if it was still around in Braxton, probably be what, 20 lesson requirement?
Maybe I think it would probably
Maybe
be
less.
around like 13, 14, not 12.
Yeah. It definitely still be a lot more. But
Or we would have had to tack on like the discard a lesson or return a lesson or something
yeah,
to
exactly.
just to stop like one shop abuse.
So with One Shot being banned, that means people have to rely on other kinds of ramp. So like I'm personally expecting that being banned to make the new 5-cost Goblet of Fire books super popular. And they've already been super popular, and a lot of people are using them because they are very, very good. So I'm expecting a lot of just like item ramp pieces now, just to fill in the gap that One Shop left. I'm not really sure though where the decks go with Letters from No One and Haggard Needs Help, and what kind of like control adventures or pieces take the place of those two cards, if any, or if decks just shift away from playing restrictive cards in that way. I don't know what replaces those.
Yeah, me neither. They were just very strong adventures, right? Just generically strong. With Fred and George around, Hagrid Needs Help was pretty much a no-brainer. Letters from No One was a very difficult one to argue, going back to like our internal discussion points, because it, on the face of it, doesn't necessarily seem the worst, because it takes 2 actions to play and your opponent gets to draw 2 cards, sort of like you end up around the same. But it's actually a very statistical, mathematical reasoning behind it because of how badly it destroys your hand.
So what actually replaces those 2 cards though?
I don't know if it gets direct replacements, right?
I think you can start digging into the other adventure pool. Like there are good adventures that just aren't played because Hagrid Needs Help just kind of pushes them all
So
off
much
to the
better.
side. But things like Homework by One Light as well is a pretty decent aggro tool that you can use to slow down your opponent, that can basically just be shoved in where Hagrid Needs Help used to exist. Though Homework by One Light does have a lot more like downsides to it than Hagrid Needs Help. It's a lot more balanced of a card, I think. And I think control decks might also want to head more towards that Hut on a Rock type of adventure, where something that's getting recurring value from it and necessitates removal.
I don't play adventures enough or think about them deep enough to really like have an that's why I'm so curious about like what actually replaces them. I really don't know. And those sound like good options. Reptile House that we mentioned earlier also sounds like a good option. I just don't know.
Yeah.
I just don't know.
Yeah.
You've got adventures have a very deep pool. It's just, I think, been shoved out mostly by these generically strong adventures. But now that we've seen like 3 of them, these 2 plus Escaping the Dursleys, oh, plus of course Caught by Snape, Who can forget Caught by Snape?
Oh, nice.
These four on the banned list, I think that we will start seeing a lot more like different places that adventures go.
Hopefully, just some
Yeah.
more diversity would be very, very nice.
And also internally, they're notoriously hard to design
God.
because they are so
Oh my God.
almost hit or miss as far as the human experience playing them is. It's
Yes.
everyone needs to realize they're very hard cards to design.
Yeah, geez. I can't imagine, or I can't remember the number of times that Frizz has just said, "Can we remove adventures from the game?" Oh,
It would
God.
make everything a lot easier,
Because
both balancing the gameplay and designing cards.
Yeah, but
they're a very hard card to design. I think it's good for people to know because obviously they are generally floodgates or the only real way you interact other than lesson removal traditionally to react or interact with your opponent. But they take two actions as opposed to the one, so you have to balance them being worthwhile. They generally have a reward as well as the restriction, which you need to balance against the reward or the restriction that they pose, and then they can come down turn one, which is something we can't control very very often. Like I know we've got some of them that have the lesson requirement stitched onto them, which I think is probably the way it will start going. But traditionally they don't have that. It's sort of only, what was it, Chamber of Secrets that started introducing that restriction, right?
no, I think stuff like Running from Filch is Adventures at Hogwarts, I want to say. That one,
Oh no, Hard on the Rocks is Adventures at Hogwarts too, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, something like that. Yeah.
That was maybe from Adventures onwards as well, but yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is, Wizards just didn't put that clause on enough cards. I think if Hagrid Needs Help had like the clause, play this card only if you have at least 5 lessons in play, like the card would be still pretty good, but I don't think it would be as strong as it is,
Yeah.
and maybe not even necessitate a ban.
Agreed. Yeah, there's definitely a lot more to consider if it can't be dropped on turn one.
Okay, so given all of those thoughts and all of that conversation around top decks and cards that we expect to see a little more of and some ban list stuff, any final thoughts from either of you before we wrap up this episode?
Yeah, I have no idea what I'm gonna play. Please help. Actually, when this sends out the tournament, submitting decks will have already closed, so
It'll be interesting to see what you choose.
life is hard.
I agree. I'm not in the so stuck realm at the moment. I think I'm more analysis paralysis sort of frozen of like all the cool cards that Goblet of Fire brought us. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll go the character route or whether I go Witch Sharpening Potion. Yeah. Also, a card we didn't talk about, Orchard Pitch is sort of like a Quidditch-ish version of One Shot, although a lot more reduced in its immediate power. So, I mean, that's another great option to sort of look at now for higher cost Quidditch spells. There are so many good cards introduced in the latest set. So,
Yeah,
hopefully
we'll
we
see.
get a lot of players to try a lot of new things.
And hopefully Quidditch can kind of make a comeback and be good for once and not as much of a meme color. But we shall see.
Hey, I take offense to that.
Listen, Quidditch is my favorite. I love Quidditch.
I love my deck from 2 tournaments ago way more than I love this character deck that placed first, and that was Quidditch.
It was a good deck. It was a good
Yeah.
deck. And thank you everybody for tuning in to our first episode of the official Harry Potter Trading Card Game Revival podcast. We are super excited to bring more episodes to you about deck techs and tournaments and everything else related to this game that we all love. You can follow us on all of our socials below, and we'll chat with you next time. See ya.
Peace.
See yas.